This week on Brian Ross Investigates. Sounding the alarm for America's firefighters is a chemical that's been used to waterproof their turnout gear, posing its own risk to the brave men and women who are called to go into burning buildings.
There's a strong correlation between the C8 form of this chemical and two types of cancer, testicular cancer and kidney cancer.
It's the same class of chemicals also used in firefighting foam.
There's 1.2 million firefighters out there, and nobody's telling them about this stuff.
Retired firefighter Paul Cotter and his wife Diane now trying to spread the word about the risk after his diagnosis with prostate cancer.
I was pissed, and there's a lot of firefighters are in the same boat that I am.
This is a epic disaster as far as we're concerned. We call it the greatest deception ever.
The companies that make the specialized fabric used in the turnout gear say they would never do anything to put firefighters at risk.
Lion is the world's largest supplier of firefighter protective clothing. It's a responsibility we take very seriously.
But with cancer now the leading cause of death for America's firefighters, there's growing concern at America's firehouses.
I'm being very honest with you, I was completely blown away. Never in my mind did I think the protective equipment that I put on to do my job is what could possibly be killing my members.
Plus, this week's winners and losers in the media, covering the insurrection in Washington. See if you agree with the editors of Mediaite. From the Law&Crime Trial Network, this is Brian Ross Investigates. Good evening, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to our viewers on Facebook Live. I'm Brian Ross, joined as always by my colleague Rhonda Schwartz. And Rhonda, January is Firefighters Cancer Awareness Month, and we begin with a report about growing concern by firefighters in firehouses across the country.
Cancer is now the leading cause of death amongst firefighters on the job. The statistics are astounding. Between 2002 and 2019, 66% of firefighters died from cancer in a list that's kept by the International Association of Firefighters. And the ages of those dying from cancer is getting younger.
And Rhonda, of course, it's a clear concern for firefighters. They know about the risk from smoke that they breathe in and fumes when they're fighting fires. But tonight we're going to report on something else, the protective gear they wear, which may bring its own risk to them. An alarm tonight from scientists for America's firefighters about a class of chemicals that has been used for years to waterproof what is known as their turnout gear.
It's added to the turnout gear to keep them dry. When a firefighter is actively using a hose, they get wet. If you are carrying 60 pounds of gear already, adding 40 extra pounds of water weight when you get wet is a real, it cuts down the time that a firefighter can be active on scene.
But Professor Graham Peasley at Notre Dame University, who's been studying the turnout gear used by fire departments across the country, says the chemical used most widely until recently, known by its shorthand C8, presents its own risk to firefighters.
There's a strong correlation between the C8 form of this chemical and two types of cancer, testicular cancer and kidney cancer.
It's the same class of chemicals in the foam used by firefighters to put out certain kinds of fires.
There's 1.2 million firefighters out there, and nobody's telling them about this stuff. So that's the most troubling aspect to it to me.
It was the case of a Worcester, Massachusetts firefighter, Paul Cotter, that helped to spur the professor's research.
I was diagnosed with prostate cancer in October of 2014. I had treatment, surgery early in 15, and had to retire from the job.
At any point when you were serving as a fire lieutenant on the force there, did you have any kind of warning that there was this potential harm from the turnout gear, the chemicals used to coat it?
No, none at all. None at all. No one ever thought about the gear as being dangerous. But we wore it all the time. We wore it shopping. We wore it sitting around in the kitchen. It was our safety net, our gear.
It was only after Cotter's cancer diagnosis when his wife Diane began to do her own research and contacted the Notre Dame professor that he learned of the potential risk.
I was pissed. And there's a lot of firefighters are in the same boat that I am.
It led Diane to become a champion in the cause to investigate the use of the chemicals in firefighters' turnout gear.
It changed everything, Brian. When I tell you it changed everything, believe me, you don't want that cancer diagnosis. I get very emotional speaking about it because he was a fireman's firefighter. So even now, 5 years later, it's difficult to talk about. This is a epic disaster as far as we're concerned. We call it the greatest deception ever.
No direct link has been proven between the chemicals used on the turnout gear and any specific firefighter's cancer diagnosis, but a growing number of firefighters are demanding answers.
My name is Jason Burns. I'm a firefighter at the Fall River Fire Department.
Do you see a connection between the cancer and the chemicals used in both foam to fight fires and in your turnout gear?
We do. Cancer's always been prevalent in our job, but now we're starting to focus on the materials that's in our gear.
Is that a surprise to you that that would be an issue, that would be a risk?
I'm being very honest with you, I was completely blown away. Never in my mind did I think the protective equipment that I put on to do my job is what could possibly be killing my members.
And have you seen a rash of cancer deaths in your department?
We've experienced not only cancer deaths, and the number of cancer diagnoses have increased. What is happening, which is also very concerning, is the number of diagnoses are going up, but we're also getting firefighters who are getting diagnosed at a younger age, which is very concerning.
Burns says 2 of his firefighters in their 30s died after cancer diagnoses.
It's heartbreaking. I'm choking up just thinking about it, talking to you right now. One of the guys that I buried was a childhood friend. Our kids are around the same age. It's very difficult. You know, it hurts.
Studies show that the leading cause of death for firefighters is cancer, with a greatly elevated rate of cancer than the national average. The presence of the chemicals has triggered lawsuits around the country, initially over its use in firefighting foam, and now over its use in firefighters' turnout gear.
Knowing what we know now, number one, it shouldn't be in the gear in the first place. And number 2, we should have been warned. And there should have been alternatives made available to us.
There are lots of hazards you face as a firefighter. Could it not be that just the toxic smoke is the cause of this problem?
It's possible. But here's a known carcinogen in front of us that we can do something about.
A few seconds can make or break a call. It can save your life.
In a video commercial posted online, one of the manufacturers of the gear, DuPont, talks about the virtues of the material used, made in conjunction with another company, Lion.
Lion is the world's largest supplier of firefighter protective clothing. It's a responsibility we take very seriously.
The video makes no mention of any health issues, and the companies say the gear is safe, that there are only insignificant trace amounts of the chemical in the gear. They say they've now stopped using the C8 formulation, switching to a different formulation, which Professor Peasley believes is something called C6.
They were all C8 up until about 5 years ago. And so now they've migrated away from that, and they're using ostensibly C6, but no industrial process is perfect.
And the professor is concerned there is still a lot of older turnout gear being used with the C8, and that not enough is still known about the risks of C6.
It's not clear to me that the C6 chemistry is any better than the C8 chemistry. It may end up being well-being. We'll find out in 10 years. It's a regrettable substitution. But most of the firefighters aren't aware that they shouldn't be handling this stuff, and that's the issue.
You need to be washing your hands after you touch it. You know, this is dangerous stuff that you're wearing. And we can't just look blindly at it and say the new replacement chemicals are fine. We need to hear from the independent scientists, and we need safety alerts right now. In fact, those safety alerts are literally 5 years too late. We have wasted a lot of time.
And so for really the more than 1 million firefighters in this country and many more around the world, this you think is a real and present danger?
Absolutely. A real present danger.
Next, we'll talk with a lawyer who has helped to reveal the widespread use of these chemicals in the blood of almost every American. His name is Rob Bilott, and Hollywood has already made him a hero. In the movie Dark Waters, he's played by the actor Mark Ruffalo. In a moment, we'll talk with the real Rob Bilott. You're watching Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network. We're joined now by Rob Bilott, the lawyer who first helped to sound the alarm about the widely used chemicals that have a potential risk of cancer, including for firefighters, from their turnout gear, which is waterproofed by the chemicals. Mr. Bilott's efforts were chronicled by Hollywood in the movie Dark Waters, where he's played by the actor Mark Ruffalo. Later, both the actor and Rob Bilott testified before Congress about the issue.
Rob not only discovered that these toxic chemicals were building up in our blood, he also sounded the alarm, sharing what he found with the EPA. And also, Rob secured the funding through a legal settlement with DuPont to undertake the biggest human health study of toxic chemicals ever.
Rob Bilott, thank you so much for joining us. This concern about firefighters is just one of a number of concerns about people who've been exposed to this chemical. How widespread is the exposure?
Oh, thanks for having me. Unfortunately, we're talking about global exposure. These chemicals are now in the blood of virtually every person on the planet and virtually almost every living thing on the planet, from people to polar bears.
To polar bears, really, that far to the Arctic Circle and beyond.
Yeah, these particular chemicals have an ability to, once they're released out into the environment, not only do they have this unique chemical structure of carbons attached to fluorine that make it very difficult for them to break down in the environment. And that's why you hear them referred to as forever chemicals now, because once they're out in our environment, they can stay there virtually forever. But they also have this unusual ability to get into us, to get into living things, including people, where they can stick in our blood and build up to higher and higher levels over time. That's why there's so much concern about any potential paths of exposure to these chemicals. You know, we first found out about these chemicals some 20 years ago by being in the drinking water. And there's been a lot of focus on exposure to drinking water, but we're just now starting to raise awareness of the other pathways that people can be exposed, such as with firefighters being exposed to these chemicals, not only possibly in their drinking water or food or products, but firefighting foam, and as we're hearing now, the potential to have been used in the coatings on turnout gear.
As you know, the industry says the amounts of the chemicals used in the turnout gear are so small, just trace amounts, that they really don't pose any kind of risk to firefighters. What do you say to that?
Well, you have to look at the nature of the chemicals that we're talking about here, and it's this ability to even the smallest amount that we're exposed to has the ability to get in us and stay there and build up to higher and higher levels. So it's not so much, you shouldn't necessarily be focused on how much is there right now in this particular exposure, but how much have I been exposed to over time? Because all of that is building up and can build up in our blood over time. So if you're exposed to even the tiniest amounts, something that somebody may call trace amounts, over many years or over continuous exposures, wearing something every day that might expose you to this, over many, many years, those levels can build up in our blood to levels where scientists and regulators all over the globe at this point are expressing serious concerns about those exposures.
Rob, a question for you from Rhonda Schwartz. Rhonda?
As you've described, this family of chemicals is in a lot of products around us, and most recently now it's been found in turnout gear. And what advice would you have for firefighters who are using turnout gear, particularly what they call the legacy gear, gear that was made years ago before any of these hazards were discovered?
Well, I think one of the things, obviously, that's most important is knowledge and awareness, to at least first become aware that this potential for exposure is out there, and make sure that I don't think anybody is saying that you shouldn't wear your turnout gear. I mean, that's absolutely critical, but be advised about when to wear it, and make sure that you're not exposing yourself unnecessarily wearing it outside the job or in other circumstances where you don't necessarily have to have that material on to, for purposes of the job. Really, once you become aware that this potential for exposure is there, you at least have the ability to start minimizing that and making sure that you're only using it when you absolutely need to.
So, Rob, finally, let me ask you, has the industry accepted any of the findings? Are they making any changes in their production, in the way they manufacture these chemicals? Or is there another way to waterproof this gear?
Yeah, what we've seen is as information finally started to come out to the public, to the scientific world, to the regulatory world over the last several years, as this information finally came out about the toxicity of PFOA and related chemical like PFOS that are part of this forever chemical PFAS family. What we saw happen was the manufacturers of those PFOA, PFOS, the C8s that are the ones of concern that have been used in these fabric treatments in many years past, manufacturers started switching away and started moving to different chemicals. But unfortunately, some of the chemicals they moved to were just slightly different. As you heard Dr. Peasley mention, instead of a C8, maybe they knocked a couple of carbons off and called it C6 or C4s. And unfortunately, that stuff is now being put out into the market, being used in these products. And the scientific world is still investigating to what extent these chemicals really are all that much safer. Will they, in fact, not build up in our blood to the same degree that the other ones do? And unfortunately, some of the toxicology data that's coming in on animal studies that are starting to be done are showing some of the same toxic effects of the old chemicals. So there's this real concern, as you heard, about regrettable substitutions. Are we simply moving from one problem to another? When there are a lot of folks that are now saying we ought to be moving away from this whole PFAS chemistry into alternative chemicals for coatings of these types of materials. So there are a lot of folks looking into this now. And one of the things I'm really trying to do is make sure that the science is done by independent scientists to confirm what this big group and class of chemicals are actually doing to us. The companies shouldn't be allowed to sit back, say, you can't prove that this is causing harm, yet not do the studies that are necessary to tell people, to tell us exactly what these chemicals are doing to us when they all get in us, and mix, and get into our blood. That's something I'm trying to pursue right now through a lawsuit we filed a couple of years ago. And actually, our lead plaintiff is an Ohio firefighter, where we're trying to not get money, but get studies and confirmational studies done of what these chemicals can do to people who are exposed, including firefighters who might be exposed through their equipment or through the firefighting foams.
All right, Rob Bellot, thank you so much. We look forward to seeing more about the studies and the continuing case and cause for concern. Thanks so very much. Coming up next, this week's winners and losers in the media, covering the insurrection in Washington. See if you agree with the editors of Mediaite. You're watching Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network. Time now for this week's winners and losers in the media, as chosen by the editors of Mediaite. We're joined by Aidan McLaughlin, who is the editor-in-chief of Mediaite, which, like the Law and Crime Trial Network, is part of the Dan Abrams media empire. And Aidan, the big winners were at CNN with a shakeup of assignments. What happened?
That's right. So both CNN and Fox News announced their new programming slates for the new administration. This typically happens, around when we have a transition of power from one president to another. The big win at CNN in their shakeup was Jake Tapper. He's the anchor of the day show The Lead, which is on at 4 p.m. And he got given an extra hour daily in the 5 p.m. hour, shortening Wolf Blitzer, who was on after him on CNN. So now Jake Tapper is hosting 2 hours a day during the weekdays, which is a serious vote of confidence from the bosses at CNN and reflects the role that Jake Tapper has taken at the network as sort of the Washington anchor that covers all the big news events in Washington.
He certainly has become the lead anchor. And of course, in television like that, airtime is everything. So who were the winners or losers at Fox?
Right. So Fox News had their own shakeup of their programming. Theirs was really remarkable. They basically put a new opinion hour at 7 p.m. on the network, which is sort of just before their big opinion primetime slate. They haven't announced a host for that hour of television. But the person who occupied that hour was Martha MacCallum, who actually had a news show, The Story, at 7 p.m. Now, to make way for that new opinion show, Martha MacCallum has been knocked back to 3 p.m., which was Shepard Smith's old spot. Now, Fox is adamant that this is not a demotion for Martha MacCallum. They're just saying that 3 p.m. is a news hour and 7 p.m. was an opinion one. So they're just changing her around a little bit. But it's certainly a less coveted real estate at Fox News. That also means that Bill Hemmer, who had 3 p.m. and replaced Shepard Smith, has been moved back to mornings. He's now anchoring from 9 to 11 at Fox News.
All right, and they all scramble to figure out how to cover the new president, President Biden, to be sworn in next week. Aidan McLaughlin, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks to all of you for watching. And thanks to our great team at Law&Crime for getting us on the air and off the air. Have a good evening.